Hello and welcome back to our Let's Talk version. We're here joined by Dan. Hey there, Dan. How's it going?
What up, buddy? Life is beautiful. Trying our very best. I just finished a fantastic workout, and I'm
Wow.
feeling super excited. I love it.
You're going to bring us more energy then. Awesome.
I love it.
All right.
Fantastic.
All right. Today we are going to talk about what, Dan? Learning from past versus living in the past. Right? So what do you first, let's just get you started. Give us a very good introduction here.
Fantastic. So you see, pal, when it comes to living versus learning, you see, the problem with most of us is sometimes we are literally living in the past, and we tend to relive those moments of, let's say, failure, and sometimes even the moments of triumph, and that prevents us from actually taking action to move forward. So I am against living in the past, both the good and the bad, because basically, if you're always dwelling on the negative and the bad stuff that happened in the past, so you tend to somehow suffer from a lot of emotional problems. And at the same time, if you dwell on your victories in the past, then that somehow prevents you from taking action because you feel complacent. Like, look at my past, man. And if you right now look, if you think about like politics, for example, right?
Right.
So if you think about the nations, ironically, some of the nations with the longest histories oftentimes aren't doing very well in the modern world. On the other hand, many nations that are quite new actually don't have a very long history are doing very well. And I think the reason is that these guys don't sit on their back and say, guess what? I have I don't know, 10,000 year history or something, buddy. Instead, they are focused on actually taking action now and taking their life to a whole new level. So because of that, I'm actually a huge fan of trying to learn from the past and think of the past as a great mentor, a very expensive one, of course, because usually we pay the price of education from the past by our failures and mistakes. But ultimately, overall, I think the best approach to life is to learn from it and then just shut it off and move on. Another great benefit of having this mindset, of course, is the fact that you simply don't have to feel depressed. I mean, from my experience, the majority of psychological disorders are rooted in the past, and the fact that someone has had something bad happen to him in the past and he or she cannot get over it. So by literally practicing the art of learning from the past and then forgetting about it, you almost immunize yourself against the absolute majority of psychological problems as well as emotional pain. So it's wonderful, and I think people should really take take this into consideration, that their past is just a teacher. It's nothing more than that. And of course, if they want to move on forward towards a better future, then they need to actually move on.
Of course, I can't agree with you more on this. And obviously, it's much easier said than done. So let's go a
That's
little
right.
bit deeper in the sense that, okay, let's just define these two behaviors, if you will, and then when we get a better idea of what each of them are exactly, then we can start tackling of how to switch from one to the other. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about learning from the past. That's
That's
sort of easier because that's sort of obvious that what you should be doing, but then that's not necessarily what we do. And I want to start off with this interesting quote from George Santayana. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Great one. I like it.
Yeah, and I recently finished reading this little tiny book called The Lessons of History, which is
Oh
like
man,
100.
listen, actually, I saw that on your Instagram
Mhm.
story. Basically, we should just like give our audience right now a brief summary of what you learned in that book.
Oh yeah. Well, so the interesting thing about this book is it has separate chapters, and the chapters are titled something like this: race and history, war and history, economy and history, stuff like this. So basically, it gives a very interesting conclusion of each aspect in history and what we can learn from it. And it doesn't necessarily give you a direction. It's a very fantastic. So the authors themselves, which I believe they're past at this point. This book was originally published, I believe, in 70s. They basically call these a summary essay of a summary of essays of the history. So basically, they went through these essays that was written, and then they gave a summary of what history has to teach us. And it was a fantastic book. I actually shared a lot. Like, beside the fact that I reviewed the book on the what do you call it, on Instagram. I also shared snippets of the book on my stories every once in a while. It was fantastic. I think this is one of those must read book for all, in my
Wow.
opinion. Because most importantly, because it's a very short read. It's 100 pages, and it's not even a big size book. So yeah,
Very
I think it's really worth it. But then one most important thing that I think everybody should consider is to go into it with as much open
good.
in mind as is possible, because it has, and it also covers usually, if there are two sides to the story, it tries to cover both sides and then let you decide the eventual thought. But then it had very great lessons, and obviously based on the name, lessons of history. So it's in the past, and we're learning from the
Exactly.
past, right? So it was very interesting in that sense. And yeah, so there's this obvious, if you ask every single person, or give or take every single person in the world, whether we should learn from the past or not, they say yes. But not most people probably don't have a proper way to do it, or proper definition of what it means. So can you give us some examples, as well as some definitions of what this is and how we can achieve it?
That's right. First of all, you said something very nice. You said most people cannot learn from their past. Well, the problem is not that they cannot learn from the past. The problem is the emotions that they tend to associate with the events in the past that ultimately make the experience of thinking about their past so painful that they just avoid it. And they end up making the same mistakes. I mean, think about a man or woman who tends to find him or herself in the same type of abusive relationships again and again and again. So why is it that this person does not somehow find a better partner? Or think about yourself. Think of somebody who is not happy with his or her job and constantly changes careers and finds one career that is worse than the other. So these are two examples of the individuals who are somehow so afraid of facing the pain of their past failures that they don't even want to learn from what happened in the past. And because of this, I really believe that if you want to somehow learn a lot from your past, number one thing is to understand that you've got to face the pain, at least at first, of facing and reliving those events one more time to find out what the lessons are. And by repeating this process, eventually you simply associate no pain at all to your past failures. It just becomes automatic, becomes a habit. But at first, like any other habit, like going to the gym, a friend of mine told me the other day that he's just started going to gym and his body aches all the time. And I told him,
Right.
dude, that's fitness. Like it literally takes at least a year for your body to be fully adjusted. And after 1 year, not only you will not experience any pain if you go to the gym, quite the opposite. If you don't go to the gym, your
You
body
experience
aches.
something. Yep.
The same thing applies here. Like for those of us who are not into contemplating about the past, learning from it, and finding the lessons in our past failures, at the beginning, it's very painful because we have to face with our own failures, which might actually undermine our own opinion of ourselves. But ultimately, that's where humility and a curious mind comes to play.
Hmm.
To err is human. To err is human. Nobody is perfect, and we're all going to fail our way to success. And at the same time, we have to literally keep making mistakes after mistakes until we reach wisdom. Because of this, we need to actually, in this case, practice humility and understand that for as long as we live, we can and should make mistakes. We have the right for it. And more importantly, there's no other way to actually fully acquire experience. So the first step is this: we should somehow distance the emotions from the facts, so that allows us to actually go ahead and analyze what happened. What did I do here? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? And this allows us to somehow learn the lessons. Now, I have a technique basically. Anytime I make a mistake, I do the same process. That is, I immediately distance the emotions from the facts, and then I find the lesson. Now, as soon as I find a lesson, I make 3 reminders on my calendar. The first one will be shown to me on my calendar in less than 2 days, the second one in 1 week, and the third in 1 month, to make sure I will never forget that lesson. So, literally, imagine right now I made a mistake and I just learned a lesson. And let's say, I don't know, the lesson was to perhaps tend to drive more carefully. For example, let's say I had a car accident and I learned that I should drive more carefully, especially in these and these conditions. So then I write down that lesson on my calendar, on my basically phone.
Mm-hmm.
For example, lesson, drive carefully, especially during these hours. For example, now I make 3 reminders for me, one 2 days from now, one week from now, and one month from now. And at that time, I can literally forget about whatever happened and get my mind focused on what's at hand and what I'm going to do in the future. However, most people unfortunately want to learn about their past by just thinking about it. And the problem
Mm-hmm.
is this. If you want to think about it, I mean, most psychological disorders, most forms of depression are all about minds that are preoccupied and unable to focus, lack of awareness. So because of this, don't think it, ink it. Try to actually write down those lessons somewhere and then say, the hell with the memory. I'm done. Here's the lessons. I got what I wanted. And you think of that failure as the tuition fee for that lesson. Because, guys, education should be free, right? But in most cases, it's not. So
Right.
think of that as your tuition fee. Like that failure, that loss, that damage, that injury, whatever it was, that was a tuition fee. Here's the lesson. I learned it. And now I'm free. You literally, by this act of writing them down, you free yourself from that thought. Now, of course, at first, it's not going to be easy because you have the old habits, but through practice and repetition, this whole process of learning from the past becomes quite easy. And I really believe that in life, we cannot truly master anything except for the process of learning. Because ultimately, we're going to fail again and again and again. We'll never be totally right about anything. So the only thing we can truly learn is learning how to learn. And the best way to learn how to learn is to actually learn from your past. So because of this, you got to distance yourself from your emotions, look at situation logically, extract the lessons, write them down, and make sure you are reminded of those lessons at least 3 times within the spans of 2 days, 1 week, and 1 month. And you literally can not give a damn about what happened in the past. It's over. Let it go. Like you literally remove it from the focus of your attention and instead focus elsewhere.
Magnificent. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you have a specific procedure because mostly you know that emotions come to haunt you, so you're creating a fail-safe basically.
That's exactly why I have procedures for this, man, because emotions are out of control, man. Like I think of myself as somebody who can manage myself and other people, but even as somebody who might have some of these abilities, even sometimes I tend to lose control over my emotions. So I can imagine how others are doing it. But because of all of these factors, the emotions somehow are rather hard to control. It's very important to approach this methodically and algorithmically with a step-by-step procedure so that you do not let your emotions get in the way.
Yeah, and I assume that you're very strict about it. You're like, no way. This is a procedure.
Exactly.
I created this in the right mind. I'm sticking with it.
Exactly.
Makes a lot of
Because
sense.
it's all about happiness. It's all about peace of mind.
Right.
And if you don't want to jeopardize them, then you've got to have a procedure.
Makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned something about humility and nobody's perfect, which actually I think touches the idea of learning from the past, or learning in general, because yeah, obviously nobody's perfect. We all always learning, no matter how much wisdom you have, no matter how brilliant you are, how regardless of your age, etc. We can always learn, right? So that was a good point. And I want to add on to that at the end. Well, you kind of covered it, but I'm going to put it in different words. So, excuse me. You mentioned that I try to let the emotions out of it and then start getting the lessons of my past, and that I agree with you, because when you have the emotions with you after the incident, it's like exactly experiencing that incident again and again, over and over again. And well, that's a point. We are saying learning from the past. We're not saying learning from the present. The reason is because we are saying past because it's a disjoint event. We are assuming that we are disconnected from our past, sort of emotionally at least. Then we can actually learn the lessons, what went wrong, what didn't. But when we have the emotions involved, we are actually living it again. Maybe not. It's actually a misguided version of it because it's not exactly it. It's what we make it in our head to be. But no matter what we are experiencing, we're living some that experience or some rendition of that experience, which takes us to living in the past, which comes with feelings. A lot of it, we are feeling that.
And let me just stop you right now, Poujix. This is something very nice, and it's right about what you just mentioned, and that's, you mentioned you have to do it right away. And
All
that's
right.
very important because ultimately our memories are not reliable. The reason that I do this immediately after the event and then I forget about it completely is this: our emotions tend to influence our memory. I mean,
Right.
certain people, here's what I realized recently in a book that I read, and they said that certain people have vivid memories of being sexually abused by their fathers,
Hmm.
even though that has never, ever happened in their entire lives,
Yep.
because
True
they have
story.
literally created and manufactured that memory.
Yep.
Right now, a lot of our negative memories that we have are completely false. They have nothing to do with the reality. And because during this entire process, the emotions are playing with that memory, they're changing and modifying it. And after a few years, we actually believe it, which
Yep.
is why it's the best time to learn about the past is immediately after that error, after that failure. Get the lesson and then completely forget about it, because most of our memories about the past ironically are influenced by emotions and are not accurate. That's the interesting, just baffles my mind when I think about this.
Yeah, and I want to, now that you mentioned it, I want to actually give a shout out to this fantastic podcast by Malcolm Gladwell called Revisionist History. On his recent season, he has two back-to-back episodes strictly talking about memory and how faulty memory is. And specifically, like I'm just going to paraphrase some part of it and saying that you can't judge a character by their memory because in nature, all of our memories are very faulty.
Exactly.
And I'm gonna give the name of those two episodes for the audiences who are probably interested because they're fantastic episodes. The first one is he recommends to listen to the first one and the second one himself, so I'm gonna do that in order. The first one is a polite word for liar, and the second one is free Brian Williams. You might
Interesting.
know Brian Williams. It explains everything in the episode, so I'm not gonna bore you with that. The podcast itself is called Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. Fantastic.
Great podcast for sure. We'll check it out.
Yeah. So getting back to our talk, I couldn't agree with you more. Our memories really suck, and we have to just accept it. There's nothing we can do about it. Maybe sometime in the future, but at least not now. So as you mentioned, we gotta learn our lesson. Learn our lesson immediately, as long as we disjointed the emotions and just forget about the whole thing, because it comes back haunting us the wrong way, because it's gonna be manipulated the memory. I'm talking one way or the other. So just forget about it.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter anymore after you learn your
That's
lesson.
right. So true.
Sorry. Now getting back to living in the past. So we got so that's exactly it. Not forgetting that memory and adding emotion to the bunch, trying to replay that incident in your brain. As we mentioned, the memory is very faulty, so it's not going to be exactly that. It's going to be actually the way we are changing it to be. So it's not even true. So it's basically living in an imaginary story in a sense. But I want you to go ahead anyways, and then just give it just of okay, what do you mean by living in the past, and then why is it? In what ways is it devastatingly harmful? Because we agree it is.
Well, speaking of devastating, I think of living in the past as no different than driving your car literally all the way looking at the rear view mirror. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how dangerous that is. I mean, just think about it.
Extremely.
Like, literally, imagine you put all of your focus on looking at the rear view mirror and driving. Imagine the kind of disaster that'll cause. Basically, the same thing happens to living in the past. I am strictly against living in the past, both good and bad. For
Mm-hmm.
example, I have prohibited myself from reliving even the good moments, the victorious moments of the past, because it leads to complacency. I mean, it's so easy to look back and say, you know what, man, 5 years ago I was a champion. I had this and that, man. This was great. I mean, you talk to some of the elderly gentlemen and like say, man, when I was younger, I had this and that. I say, what do you have right now, buddy? Okay. So the point is this: ultimately, living the past is, from my perspective, always wrong, whether it's about the good stuff or the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
However, the fact of the matter is that most people tend to live in the past mainly to relive the negative experiences, not their positive
True
experiences.
story.
But usually they also do that as well. So both are wrong for the simple reasons that if you live in the past and you relive the negative experiences, then that ultimately leads to one thing, and that is depression, loss of self-esteem, and more important, loss of motivation and productivity. Is you're just living in that one, like your state comes down, and we already mentioned in NLP that your state determines what kind of actions you take, and that will ruin your psychological, emotional state completely. So you don't take any action, you don't make any new plans. So you have nothing to do basically, and then you just keep living under far below your potential, and you just don't feel happy about your life. The second case is when you relive the good moments of your life. Oh, you know who I was, man, in the year 2012, I was this and that. In 2013, dude, it's 2018. What have you done now? All right.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, usually we do not learn much from our good experiences, because they say that the majority of learning actually happens from our failures. So
Right.
reliving the good moments in the past might boost your emotion a little bit. And of course, I'm not against it, because I believe positivity is great. If you want to relive the past to momentarily gain a good state of mind, go for it, and then get busy with the present. However, living in the past for thinking about what went wrong and all the problems, that's the worst. I think there's nothing that has low ROI than this one. And ROI, by the way, is return on investment. So there's no ROI on that behavior. You're just wasting your life. So I am against living the past, because ultimately it prevents you from living the present or moving towards a great future. Literally, if you live in the past, you might as well just drive your car looking at the rear view mirror. That's going to happen, because that's exactly what you're doing to your life right now.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add a quote to that when you said rear view mirror. John F. Kennedy says, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." Well, we're not talking about the present right now, but then the idea remains the same. And
Exactly.
and my personal opinion is that I really like control. There's a whole debate whether control is an illusion or actually a real thing, which we can discuss later, obviously. But then
We already got a great topic for our future programs.
yeah, right. So right now, to the extent that we define control, I like my thing is be able to be in control, and my past I have no control over. So worrying about it, being upset about it, has no good for me personally. Future, I have a little bit of control because I will create it by my present, and it will come at some point. Then it will be my present, and I will have some control over it. So I worry about it a little bit, but the most control I have is actually on my present. So
Exactly.
instead of spending that present time, which I have control over, and worrying about the future or the past, especially the past, I will actually employ something to create a better future.
Precisely.
That would be my opinion on why you shouldn't be living in your past, reviewing all those memories, because it's completely useless as long as you've got the lesson. Get out. But now the interesting thing is, oh well, let me give you one more quote, and then we move on. If this is the final quote.
We're getting on a lot of quotes here lately. I like it.
I know.
I
Rick
love the
Warren
quotes.
says, yeah, I love quotes too. It's so good, especially when they're on topic. Rick Warren says this one: "We are products of our past, but we don't have to be prisoners of it." It's a very good quote.
Wow.
Very good quote.
Such a great quote. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, a very good quote. Anyhow, so the interesting thing is, though, like I've talked to a lot of people who were basically suffering from this, let's call it disease or like condition better, of living in the past. And when I talk to them this with these, to not exactly the same things as you said or I said even, but then the same idea, their response is, like not all of them, but then some are like, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's true. You're right, but I can't help it. I can't stop myself from living in the past and just get the lesson and get out. What do you have to say to those people?
Well, ultimately, you see, the reason that most of us, have a bias towards our past is simply because the future for us, for our brain, evolution speaking, is not as tangible as the past or the present are, basically. So, generally speaking, the past seems to occupy most of our attention because ultimately the past is something that is more tangible. It's real for us.
Right.
And ultimately, the problem for most people that do not have the ability to focus on the past is lack of goal orientation, and more importantly, lack of an ideal lifestyle that promotes well-being. So there are mainly two reasons. First of all, think about the last time you felt extremely lost in your negative memories of the past. The chances are, first of all, you were alone somewhere, or you were doing some menial task that did not truly attract your attention. You were not experiencing the sort of flow where you're absorbed in the task. So that's number one. And number two, the chances are you're probably not pursuing a very ambitious goals. You see, Tony Robbins says something very nice. He says, if you want to get rid of an inferior problem, get a bigger problem. The
Mm-hmm.
same thing also is mentioned by Grant Cardone. You see, people tend to overthink about the past because they don't have anything bigger to go forward to. I mean, let's be honest. The best way for the human brain to forget about a problem, a bad event, or a bad memory is to deal with such a bigger crisis or set of crises that tends to fully occupy his mind that he has no time. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this. Imagine, for example, today you lost, let's say, $200 in the subway, right? And
Right.
you just lost the money. You feel very down on yourself. But then imagine somebody calls you and says your best friend was just hit by a car and he's probably dying. In
Mm-hmm.
this case, you didn't really care that much about that $200. Let's make it bigger. Imagine you made a bet in the stock market and you lost all of your life savings. You feel
Mm-hmm.
quite devastated, right? But
Mm-hmm.
imagine your doctor calls you and says, we're going to introduce some couple of tests here. I think you have a fatal cancer that will kill you in less than 4 months.
Right.
All of a sudden, the loss of your life savings makes no difference to you. Like you don't even care about it. Okay.
Right.
So ultimately, in life, you can never get rid of an old inferior problem or a bad memory unless you create a bigger problem, which is why I'm telling you, we come to this concept again and again, not only in this podcast, but throughout all of our publications online. And that is in life, everything can be summed up in literally one word, 10x. Like you want to go for bigger goals. You want to set ambitious goals that cause so many problems that you have no time to think about the little things.
Right.
This happened to me. I'm sure this happened to you as well, where once you get bigger problems, the inferior problems are no longer that important. I mean, in business, for example, if you're dealing with a serious problem, all the other problems just disappear. So why do most people find it so hard to stop living in the past? For the same reason most people are not happy with their finances, for the same reason they're not happy with many aspects of their lives. It's simply because they don't have anything bigger to go to shoot towards, man. It's because their minds are preoccupied with things that are below their capacity, with inferior goals. Their lives lack ambition and direction. Because literally, imagine right now, okay, you're depressed. Okay, just imagine you're depressed right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a dingy room all by yourself, thinking about how the world is a wrong place and everything should come to an end. Then all of a sudden, a hungry lion, literally out of nowhere, runs into your room and starts chasing you. I'm pretty damn sure you have a way of forgetting about your depression for at least a couple of minutes. I'm pretty damn sure.
Right.
Why? Because at that moment, the lion's hungry, buddy. He's coming after you. You got to save your ass. And in that condition, you have no choice but to at least temporarily change your state of mind and to save your life. The exact same thing happens to all of us. Within every one of us, there is the capacity to instantly change our emotional state and forget about the past if we are dealing with something much more serious, which is why people say, well, then why do people keep working? I mean, some people just have a lot of money. Why do they keep just working? For the same reason,
That's
buddy, because
why.
when they have money, they got to actually create bigger problems. They got to take bigger risks and make bigger things happen. Otherwise, they will suffer the same problems that poor people have because their lives, they no longer have big problems to solve. So their mind gets busy with unimportant things, which is why the answer to all of these problems is one thing. If you find yourself repeatedly dwelling on the past, especially in a negative way, that it means you are probably living far below your means, and more importantly, you're probably spoiled by your current situation and by the comfort zone. You got to find yourself out of the comfort zone, and you, for the same way that lion chasing you will make you forget your depression,
Mm-hmm.
you being pushed out of the comfort zone in the pursuit of something bigger, riskier, more ambitious will also compel you to not even have the time or the desire to think about the past. That's exactly my best advice to everybody who perhaps finds himself or herself in a dire situation where their past is haunting them all the time.
True story. I mean, something has to grab your attention. If it's not a problem in the present, it will be your past or something of the sort. But yeah, that's very true. And again, I mean, We are here. We've been put here, and by nature designed here to be solving problems, right? And if we don't have problems, we tend to, start
Create
lingering.
problems, exactly.
Right. I mean, that's a good thing to create good problems, because it like goal oriented problems to basically push us towards the
Right.
right way. But then if you don't do that, our brain creates its own problem, and that might be lingering to the past, and that's
Exactly.
obviously a very devastating thing. So chances are, if you're listening to this and you are one of those people who classify yourself as living in the past, chances are you don't have a real at present positive present problem. So go find that problem, and
It's
it will.
all about goal setting, man.
Yeah.
Everything. It always comes down to one thing: lack of ambitious goals, lack of goals that we have set for ourselves. Now, trust me, most people do have goals. I mean, the majority of the people have goals,
Right.
but these are not the goals that they have set for themselves. Many youngsters go to school not because they wanted to, but because their
You
parents
have
and
yeah.
society forced them to. People go to work and have a lot of goals and tasks assigned to them by their bosses, but they themselves aren't doing it. So ultimately, people do have goals. What we lack a lot are self-assigned goals based upon our values, desires, and ambitions.
True story. And then that takes us back to the idea we talked about this in an episode called around thinking big. I don't know exactly what it was called, but then
Exactly.
yeah. So that also helps, because if you have a massive goal in mind, then you really don't have time for dwelling on the past, right? So you wouldn't be lingering in the past and living in the past. And that's another thing. Like when we talk about problems, there's always a negative, a negativity associated with it. Everybody thinks like problems are bad. You're gonna move away from them, but that's not true necessarily. You want the good problems, right?
Exactly.
And so yeah, that's another thing. Like, just don't consider problems a bad thing, by nature. They're not really necessarily. Well, that was a good talk. I think we covered a lot of stuff here, and then um, let's move on to the final stages of our this episode,
That's right.
and that is to basically, sum up the ideas of living in the past and learning in the past. And before we go to the final comment, can you give us a packaging of this whole two together?
Fantastic. Sure. Definitely. So ultimately, learning from the past is necessary. Those who do not learn from their past are doomed to repeat their mistakes again and again. So I am not against it. However, there are ways to go about it. And since our emotions get in the way, it's better to learn from the past in a methodical manner. How do I do it? Very simple. Instantly, right after the mistake has happened, as soon as I find some free time, I think about what I did wrong and I extract lessons from it. I then immediately write them down and make 3 reminders on my phone. One after 2 days, one after, because you don't need a reminder for the same day because you already know what the mistake was, right?
Right.
One after 2 days, one after 1 week, and one after 1 month. And then I forget about it completely. Now, to do so, I can't. You see, the nature does not, there's no such thing as a vacuum in the nature. If there's a vacuum, it's got to be filled again. So I don't just say, all right, I'm done with the past now, so let's not think about the past. It's like saying, let's not think about an elephant. You think about an elephant, right? So the moment I get rid of that thing, I don't say, let's not think about the past. My mind is now so busy and swarmed by all the other problems and challenges of my other goals that I don't have the time to actually think about the past. So the next stage is get yourself some ambitious goals, man. Have something you are looking forward to in life. Things that are actually going to force you to go towards a bigger dream. Thirdly, anytime you find yourself in a bad situation where you might somehow find it hard to forget about the past, don't be alone. Socializing has proven to help a lot when it comes to
Very
overcoming
true.
depression and other problems. So just go out, go hang out with your friends, go talk to somebody else, call your old friend, whatever you do, don't be alone. You learned a lesson, get yourself out of that state of mind, and then pursue your bigger goals. And more importantly, living the past has no ROI, even if it's about the good stuff. The people who live in the past, even when it comes to their good stuff, let's say their victories in the past, who they were, how they looked 20 years ago and whatnot. You see, man, at that time, look at my body. Now I'm pretty fat, but at that time I was very thin. So these people ultimately will miss not only their present, but also their future. So forget about the good stuff as well. it's great that you've done some good stuff, but who you are now matters a lot more than who you were 10 years ago. So don't be complacent and try to move towards a brighter future. And in the end, understand that if you want to get good results, you want to move towards a bright future, and you got to constantly up the ante and get yourself bigger problems. We need bigger problems, not because it's cooler, but because it's absolutely necessary. It's a part of our personal evolution throughout our lives. We need bigger problems. We need bigger goals. Otherwise, basically all the failures in the past will hold us down, and we cannot get rid of them. So that's very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. The dynamic system of your mind, whether it's with socialization or with massive goals, is very important, because if it's not moving your state of mind, then it will be filled with horrifying thoughts of the past, or it could be lots more, but we were talking about the past word, so we're going to stick with it. So another thing I really liked, I mentioned it then too, it's the procedure. Like, you have to define something for yourself, not just in this case, but anything that emotion can tamper a bit. Yeah, because when the emotion comes, sometimes it might be a good emotion and direct you positively, but most often than not, it's not.
Exactly, that's right.
and you might not be able to control it at the moment. So you probably want to have a fail-safe to put yourself back in check. And the procedures ahead of the time, in the right mind, without those emotions involved, thought out, created, is very good methodical, as you mentioned. It's a good method to basically come up with to create a fail-safe, so you're not falling into the pitfalls of emotions. So that Precisely. I very much like, not with the context of living in the past or versus learning from it, but rather in any emotional situation.
So true.
Yeah, very good topic. I like it a lot. And then to wrap up, any final comments or advice?
Well, obviously, understand this. If you have made a mistake, imagine maybe you are listening right now and you've just made a huge mistake that cost you a lot, emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, whatever, it doesn't matter. Understand this. To err is human. You are a human being. So am I. So is Poujix. So is everybody else. Understand that we will never be perfect. We will never be perfect. We will never be totally right. And our opinions and wisdoms, no matter how many books you read, no matter how many ideas you got, no matter how intelligent you are, nobody is perfect. Nobody will ever be perfect. So understand that everyone has the right to make mistakes for as long as they live. You cannot be perfect. So do not bash your head against the wall and say, oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm stupid. You're not stupid. You're just a human being like the rest of us. We're all just trying to figure our way out. We're all dummies who are trying to find our way out. So you're not alone. You belong to the race called humanity. We're not robots. We're not AIs. Our brains are not the internet. We cannot take surveys and then make decisions. We are
Maybe
humans.
one day. Maybe one day
we will. That's right. Yeah, another episode. When what was it called? Actually, you told me earlier.
Singularity.
Singularity when it happens.
Right.
But until then, we're just humans, and we're not supposed to be perfect, which means it is okay to make mistakes. Just learn the lesson, and please forgive yourself, because the people who can't forgive themselves can also forgive others, and these people often have much better social lives and live much more happily. So please forgive yourself, learn the lesson, fuck the haters and the bad comments. Oh, you did this, you did that. Fuck all of them. If your mommy or daddy told you something, fuck your mama, fuck your daddy. Forget about them. If your best friend told you, oh my gosh, and constantly reminds you of that mistake you made, fucking break up all the relationship with that motherfucker. Understand that you are a human being and you need to somehow learn, and you have the right to make mistakes. So make them, learn from them, and then move on towards a bright future.
Yeah, I mean, life is about making mistakes and correcting them. So why do we assume that it shouldn't be? Very true story.
Exactly.
Fantastic episode. Thank you, Dan, for being with us again.
My pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you for tuning in. Until later episodes, take care of yourself. Don't think too much about the past. Think enough to learn your lessons and move on from them. Have a good one.